Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I have a harp player with me, and I think I'm almost certain this is the first time in over 100 episodes now. Kirsten Agresta Copely, welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, you're an active teacher, a professor, and also an active performer. How are you dealing with the current times? What are you doing? And how are you, communicating with your fans and audiences and your students?
Oh, well, that's a triple-fold question. The teaching has been very interesting. We just finished, I teach at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm the professor of harp there. And we just finished our semester mostly online from spring break on. And so, the challenges of that are immense, but at the same time, it's been a unique experience. And I've just been trying to embrace it the best way possible, as far as the teaching is concerned, and as far as the performing is concerned. Wow, it's really sad to not be able to play in front of live audiences, and I think that's something that's been very challenging, for every musician who has a performance, a performing career and wants to be on stage and wants to have the feeling of having an audience to play for. But I've actually been doing a lot of live streaming. Okay. just like a lot of other people have been doing. And I started a couple of different series. One of them is called Songs in the Key of Quarantine, stolen from a Stevie Wonder album that I really love. I do an afternoon tea series. Tonight, actually, I'm doing one called Cocktails and Covers, where I play cover songs for cocktail hour. And I'm just trying to make the best of it, doing, whatever I can to share my music with others on the platforms that we have right now.
Yeah. Well, before we got on, we spoke a little bit about your duo project, I believe, with your husband. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's great that I'm here right now with talking to you because he's upstairs working on it right now. So the duo is called Harp and Plow. And my husband is actually a singer, songwriter, guitarist, engineer, producer, a lot of slashes in there. Yeah. And he was actually a solo artist on RCA for a long time ago and had a nice career as a solo artist. So he's coming from a blues kind of background, and I'm coming obviously from a classically trained, background. So we're kind of meeting in the middle and doing some really interesting arrangements of some Depression era songs that are very timely for this period that we're all living in, but also original songs and songs that he's written. So.
Yeah, and I read about him. He's very accomplished. He's played with all these, really renowned figures in music. And I also had a chance to listen to a song that you both, put out there on the YouTube a couple of weeks ago, I think.
Okay.
I had a chance to listen to that as well. So that's great. Hey, I've been talking to all these individuals who are in, I consider you as one of them because, you kind of do something that most people wouldn't do. Like, for example, I would never think of harp as an instrument that goes out and does pop and rock and hip hop gigs, or not gigs, but collaborations and other things. So how did that come about? Because the harp is, considered a classical instrument. I've seen some used in jazz, but I never thought it would be in hip hop and rock and pop. So how'd that come about?
Well, one of the things I've been really grateful for in my career is that I've been able to be very versatile. And, I always enjoy listening to lots of different types of music. And I always liked being able to play a lot of different types of music. And wow, it really kind of harkens back to about 2005. I got called to play at a show called Live Aid, and it was the 10th anniversary of Willie Nelson's Live Aid, and it was with Kanye West. So that was my introduction to hip hop and the world of hip hop, and I actually worked with him for, my gosh, about 10 years, doing a lot of different projects, playing anything from late night TV and Saturday Night Live to playing at the Hollywood Bowl a number of years ago. So, and that led to a lot of different collaborations with other artists in that genre. I played with Jay-Z and with Beyonce, and one of my favorite performances, I think, and gigs that I've had in life was being able to play with Beyonce at the White House for President Obama.
Yeah, and I read about that. That's impressive. I always think about this because a lot of these artists, some of them are well-trained musicians, but others, might not have that background. Sometimes might not even know, certain instruments. But
right.
How does the collaboration happen? Have some of them been very particular about, hey, I really want you to do this, or have they been just open, do whatever you want, you sound great?
It's a little of both, to be honest.
Yeah.
A lot of times when we go into the rehearsals for shows, they'll have charts for the harp and they'll have charts for the string instruments. But with the harp, a lot of times they'll say, do your thing. And then I get to, put my little special sauce on it.
That's awesome.
So, and I like to improvise and be able to come up with my own parts for things. And I've been fortunate that these artists allow me to do that. And I can remember one instance I was playing with Jay-Z at Carnegie Hall, which is kind of a weird venue for a hip hop artist, but we really brought down the house. And I was kind of messing around with this little bending of the string that you can do by pushing into the string and making like this little quiver sound. And they just went ape, what, over it. and just they were like, what is that? And they put it in the show. They were like, do that. We want that to happen. And they turned it up really loud so that it was echoing off the side of the back walls of Carnegie Hall. It was very cool. So.
That's awesome. Hey, for those who don't know, and I know you probably get this question a lot, but a little bit about the harp specifically, like the strings, because people, they kind of, with a piano, for example, or other instruments, they'll be like, oh, well, it has keys, it looks like this. But with the harp, it's, some people don't even know it has pedals. So, for example.
That's true.
So a little bit about the harp, just some general things.
Okay, so the concert grand harp, which is the one that you see at the back of an orchestra, that has 47 strings, and it is designated. Actually, can I turn my computer and show you? It's right next to me, so you can just take a look at it. So there's red strings and black strings, and they're set up in scales like the white keys on a piano. Okay, so they would go up in order of a scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, all the way up all the octaves. And so I consider the strings like the white keys on a piano, and then the black keys on the piano would be the 7 pedals that are on the bottom of the instrument. And each one of those pedals corresponds with one note of the scale. So the D pedal would control D flat, D natural, and D sharp for every octave of that note. So it's a very complicated and complex instrument. And one fact I think that people probably don't know is there's 2,000 moving mechanisms in the neck of the harp.
Wow.
So there's a lot going on inside the instrument that you don't see to make it work.
Wow, that's amazing. And harp players are also all very strong, because it's tough to take to places. And that's the same thing with percussionists. This is not a violin or something you just put on your shoulder and you walk out. This is like a massive instrument. And the tough thing I always felt bad with harp players is that they have to come into rehearsal, set up ahead of time, more so than some of the other instruments. Of course, everyone does, but with the harp, it's really a process, just like with percussion instruments. So it's
for sure. We're probably one of the most punctual of artists, because we always have to be there early, not just on time, but early. So, and this is, during this time, it's been like the one time where I haven't actually had to move the harp. It just sits at home and I set it up and play from my living room.
That's awesome.
But I was also really lucky because I lived in New York City for 18 years. And during that period of time, I actually had a harp mover that would come and pick me up. I didn't have a car when I lived in the city because there was no reason to. It's obviously a city that you can walk in, and then you have public transportation in, but you can't put the thing on the subway. So, so I had a driver that would come and pick me up. So, I didn't have to muscle it quite as much as I do now.
Remind everyone, what city are you in now?
I live in Nashville now.
This is crazy. I had a couple of people from Nashville now at this point.
I know you, Marc O'Connor.
Yeah, Marc O'Connor, and actually I do like an Armenian program, kind of and I had someone who was from Nashville as well for that.
Oh, cool.
But anyways, you know, one thing that is really frustrating with musicians, sometimes it could be competitions. And I saw that you've done a competition, and I don't know how many you've done, but that was a big one. And a little bit about competitions, and what advice would you give young musicians with competitions? Because it could be frustrating. You don't win. You constantly, you know, you feel like you should, but you don't. And, you know, it could be tough, mentally draining, I guess.
Absolutely. I grew up as a competitive pianist and harpist. So I was in, you know, regional and national competitions from the time I was very little. So I kind of grew up in that lifestyle, and I don't really know any differently than that. But you know, on the international stage, obviously the one you're referring to is the USA International Competition, which I was the bronze medal winner in. And you know, I always felt that it was very good for me, because I liked not only hearing my colleagues play and knowing what level they were at, and that inspired me to maybe, you know, work on something a little bit more. And I liked the pressure of that. I also liked the deadline of having something to work towards for, you know, for repertoire, and the idea that, especially with an international competition where you have a variety of stages where you have to learn a lot of music, you know, a lot of music for, it was interesting to be able to learn how to budget time and figure out how to manage time, you know, to make that, you know, to learn everything and be able to perform it at a high level. As far as advice, you know, you win some, you lose some, and it's a subjective field that we're all in. Music is, you know, what one person likes, another person doesn't. You know, there are basic things like technique and you know, musicianship that you have to have. But at the end of the day, someone's style is going to be, you know, great for one person and not great for another. So I guess I would just tell what I tell my students that are in competitions is, look, you go in and you do your best, and you play from your gut. You play with the blood. You know, you play from as much as you can give of yourself in that moment, and then you leave it up to the universe, and whatever happens. You know, and you can't be distraught if you don't win, because it may be a bad day for you, but it might be a bad day for the judge too.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So.
And that's what I always think. Sometimes, because you don't get into conservatory, you know, you always hear these things with athletes or musicians. Oh, I tried to get into Juilliard, or I was cut from the Division I basketball team, but I was actually great. But maybe you were not great, so you got cut, or you didn't win. But then you were so amazing that you went back and you worked even harder, and you came back and you did it next time. But you're right; it also could be the other way. It's not always your fault, and music is very subjective, and it's tough because. And I hear these things from judges. Oh, you know, that person, it says retardando, but that was just too much for a retardando. Or, you know, it says accelerando, but it was too much. So it's very subjective. I mean, you might do something, but it's. Well,
I've been on both sides of it too, because I've also judged competitions. So, you know, and that's always an interesting switch, to be behind the screen and to be hearing the students play and have to be judging them as I was judged back in the day, you know. So the roles are reversed now.
Yeah. So you mentioned piano. So I'm assuming you started on the piano and then went to harp. Is that how?
Yes, it is. I was very fortunate because I grew up in a household where there were a lot of unusual instruments. My mother's actually a musician as well, and she was a music educator. So from a very young age, she had me sitting on her lap basically when I was 18 months old, she had me sitting on her lap at the piano, teaching me the notes and teaching me, you know, these very simple pieces. So I really started playing the piano when I was 2. And I started playing the harp when I was 5.
Wow.
So we had a small troubadour harp, which is a lever instrument. So it's a smaller version of the big concert grand. And it
doesn't have pedals, right?
No, it has levers, and the levers switch it from natural to sharp. Yeah. So that was my very first instrument, but I grew out of that very quickly. And I was studying regionally. I grew up outside of Detroit, Michigan. And so I had a wonderful teacher there. But by the age of 11, she was kind of feeling like I needed to elevate, you know, my studies. And so my parents actually drove me to Bloomington, Indiana once a month to study with Suzanne McDonald, who at the time was teaching at Indiana University and had a long legacy of having the largest harp department in the world there. So she was my mentor basically from the time that I was a child. And I ended up going to Indiana for both of my degrees and studying with her. And, you know, that was my journey. Yeah.
With accomplished musicians, I always like to know a life-changing moment where you know, it just something unusual happened or something big happened to really take you to where you are now. And life-changing moment, the past couple of guests have said, well, life-changing moment, I have a hard time saying something that's not personal or musical. So if you want to say something personal and musical, you're welcome to.
Oh my goodness. Life-changing moment. Well, I guess something that a lot of people don't know about me, in fact, a lot of my friends don't even know about me, is that I actually went to Indiana University as a voice major my first year.
Wow.
I quit the harp for about 6 to 8 months. I just decided that I just didn't want to play anymore. I was kind of a stubborn teenager. And I wanted to pursue something else that I loved and that I wanted to, wanted to see if I wanted to do for a living. And I think my aha moment was when I was standing in the hallway and I saw my harp professor walk out with other students. And she looked at me and said, "Kirsten, what are you doing here?" You know, I had no idea that I was even at the school. And something in me just flipped and I was like, this is ridiculous. What am I doing? This is my passion. This is what I'm really great at. And I you know, this is what I should be doing. Yeah. So I think that was kind of a defining changing moment in my life where I really decided that this is what I was going to, you know, pursue for my career. And that's the only thing I've ever done is play music. So.
Wow. And you said that you do listen to different genres of music, but if you were to open your phone, what's the last 5 tracks?
Open my phone?
Or whatever you used to listen to.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I would say there's probably Beethoven, Genesis, Peter Gabriel, what else did I just listen to? Actually, I was just listening to Ozzy Osbourne, believe it or not, because I did a cover of his Crazy Train recently. Okay. so I have that kind of on you know, like a playlist that I listen to a lot, just like for workouts and stuff, you know. But I listen to a lot of different things, and I play on a lot of different soundtracks, and I just finished playing on a Persian record. Oh, wow. So, and doing world music. So, you know, anything and everything is in my wheelhouse as far as, you know, listening and playing.
Wow. So tell me, you know, another thing that in reading about you, I realized is the World Harp Congress. What is this about?
Okay, well, the World Harp Congress was actually founded by my professor, Suzanne McDonald, and it is a wonderful organization that we meet every 3 years in a different city in the world, and it's kind of like I guess you could compare it to maybe the Olympics. It's like a harp Olympics in the sense that we meet, let's say, in Copenhagen or in Berlin or wherever. And we have a week long of performances and workshops and lots of different activities that bring us all together. And one of the wonderful parts about it is there's a program called the Focus on Youth, which allows students to play on a special recital. And they're all chosen by audition and by video audition. And I was actually one of those people back in the day. So that was how I integrated into the Harp Congress. And now I'm on the board of directors.
Yeah,
So,
that's why I asked you, because you're the perfect person to ask about this as a member of the board of directors. So that's great. And what are some what's like a concerto, a piece that you just can't wait to go back to and play again? Because, you know, and I know some harp repertoire, but you know, maybe something you've done before many times and you want to go back to it, or maybe it's something that you've just played once and you're like, I really have to have another try.
That's an easy answer for me. There are a lot of harp concertos that are standard to our repertoire. The Hinastera is one of them, and that's probably one that you're familiar with for sure.
Yeah.
But I actually love playing a lesser known one by a composer named Castelnuovo Tedesco.
Okay.
And there's a concertino for harp and chamber orchestra that I've played numerous times with orchestra, and it's one of my favorite pieces to play. So.
Castelnuovo Tedesco also wrote quite a few guitar pieces.
Yes.
And I think that's what I'm more familiar with, because when I was in California, our music department had a huge guitar department, and I remember listening to quite a few of the compositions.
Okay.
So
he also wrote a sonata for harp and cello, which I performed on a recital a long time ago at Carnegie Hall. But I don't know what his fascination was with the harp, but he wrote very well for it, and you know, it's a great piece. So.
Did I remember reading correctly? Did you perform something by Alan Hovhaness?
Hovhaness, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was that? And the reason why I ask, it's also a couple of reasons. One is because he is his father was Armenian, so it was that the Armenian connection with me, and also because he lived in the Pacific Northwest, where I live now, which is, you know, he lived here for the last 20 years of his life, I think. So.
Oh wow! Okay, I didn't realize that, but yes, it's his nocturne for harp.
Okay.
And I recorded it on my very first album called Dream World. So.
Yeah. And that was 99. Was that 99 or
2001?
2001. Okay. Just things
long time ago.
Things are coming back to me as I remember reading some of the things about you. But you're also a composer. I realized you're a composer.
Yes, I dabble. I would say I started releasing my compositions about a year ago. Okay. So it's a new thing for me, and I released. I started out by doing a couple of singles, and I titled them all with Italian titles because I'm half Italian. My father was Italian. And I just have an affinity for the country and the culture. and so I kind of released those to just kind of test the waters with the digital platforms to see how people would react to them and whether they would really have any ground whatsoever. And I had a really nice response to them, and it kind of gave me the excitement to try to continue it. And so my husband and I teamed up, and we actually recorded an album called Around the Sun. And it's a new age ambient album. So all of the compositions are my originals, but they take the listener on a journey through a 365-day cycle. So it starts with daybreak and it ends with winter's bone. Oh, wow. And so it's I guess you could say it's nature, related with the experience that you will have when you listen to it. But it does take you through a process from January through December, as you will, and that's been a really exciting part of our life is collaborating together. And in that particular instance, he was the engineer, he was the mixer, he was the producer, and he added all of the ambient treatments to it. So wow. It's a very unique album. It's one that we're very proud of because it's never really been done in that way before. And so, we're pretty happy with the way it turned out.
So there must be some intense collaborative experiences. Any that you would like to share?
In general, or
well, this is specific to your husband, because
okay.
Okay. It could be tough to collaborate with a spouse, right?
It can be. You're absolutely right. And we actually tried collaborating together over 10 years ago when we were still living in New York City. And we were living in a tiny little shoebox, 1-bedroom apartment in Hell's Kitchen. And, you know, we had like this tiny recording set up in the corner of our bedroom. I mean, it was just like, you know, a tough way to try to begin a collaboration. And we really could not make it work. I mean, we just, you know, butt heads all the time. But I think you grow in your relationship. Obviously, fast forward to present day, I think we're working together very, very well. And I think one of the things we had to learn, actually 2 things we had to learn. One was that we don't speak the same musical language. So I come from obviously the classical world, and I might call a chord one thing and he might call it something else because he has jazz language, and I'll be like, what is that? You know? And so we had to come to a common understanding of what our language was going to be to discuss what we're doing. But you also have to sit back and put your egos aside. And I think it's very easy to get frustrated, especially if things aren't maybe going the way you want them to when you're recording, and you know, how come you did that, you know? But I think we've been able to sort of put the husband-wife hats at the door and walk to the studio and just be musicians working together on a project. And because he's the producer and the engineer, I have to respect that as well. So when he's saying, okay, we need to go back and let's punch this, or let's work on this again, that's where I have to just kind of fall in line and you know, and be collaborative in that way, you know.
Well, another thing which I thought about when you were talking about your recent album with your husband is that you know, as musicians, it could be tough when you're working on an album that's, you know, a jazz album or something, and then a day later you're working in this classical setting or something. And with your background, it seems like you've done a lot of the back and forth. What does it take, and is it really hard mentally to just prepare, or physically, or whatever it takes? Is it hard to go from one genre that's completely different from another? And if it's not tough, how do you deal with it? I mean, it must be tough. I mean, for me, it seems like it might be tough.
Well, I think honestly, when I go into a recording session here in Nashville, I don't always know what I'm playing on until I get there. So you show up and you could be playing on a video game, you could be playing for an artist, you could be playing on a movie soundtrack. I mean, they don't tell you when they hire you necessarily, you know. So I think you just have to be ready for everything. You know? And the good thing is, you know, I've done a lot of different collaborations with artists like Evanescence, for instance. So that's, you know, like a hard rock, goth rock kind of situation. It so happens that the lead singer is a big fan of the harp, and she actually was one of my former harp students.
I read about that, and I wanted to ask about that. Cool.
Yeah. So Amy and I have been friends for a long time. I taught her when we were both still living in New York, and yeah, it was really amazing to play in the studio with her and to play on her last album, because she brought in the harp, not realizing that I was going to be the harpist, and I showed up on the session.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it was like, oh my God, you know, how could this possibly be, you know? But since then, I've actually played some live shows with them, and that's been really cool. But then on the flip side, just, I don't know, a couple months ago, I was in the studio with the Mavericks, who are like a country group, rock group that are amazing. And, you know, it to me, it's the best of all worlds, because I never really wanted to get what I call stuck doing one thing. I didn't want to be pigeonholed into just the classical mold, or just the whatever, you know. And part of that theory is what I take into my teaching as well, because one thing I'm sure of is that you have to be open as a musician, and you have to be ready to do things you might not have thought you were going to do in your career. And, you know, you might be dead set that you're going to be an orchestral harpist, and, you know, that's just what you want to do. But the bottom line is, how many orchestra jobs come open in a year? And there's only one spot for a harpist. So the numbers are very small. And is it realistic to just, you know, I mean, I think it's fine if that's what you want to do, but you have to be ready for it not to happen, and that there might be a veer off course that you didn't expect. And you know, life is full of different paths and change. One thing you can be sure of is change, right? So being versatile and being flexible, I think, is really important as a musician.
Yeah, and that's great advice. I was going to ask for an advice for young musicians, but you just answered it. That's awesome.
Great.
Well, you know, with musicians, we know that you're doing so many things in music and otherwise, but we don't know about your hobbies, or maybe some people do. I don't. So what are some of your hobbies? What are some unusual things that you do that not many people know about?
Well, I don't know how unusual any of them are. I love to read. I'm an avid book reader. I love to play Frisbee with my dog. I love nature. So my husband and I love to hike a lot and get out into the woods and get away from the, you know, well, and at the moment we've been quarantined for I don't know how long. So get out of the house, but maybe not right now. But I spend a lot of time. I actually, one thing maybe people don't know about me is I love to do the New York Times crossword puzzle every day.
Wow.
So
why New York to Nashville?
Well, the short answer to that is that after living for almost 20 years in the Big Apple, we kind of looked at each other. We were living in a very small, you know, tight situation as far as our living quarters were concerned, and it wasn't a great quality of life. We were working at the top of our game, and we certainly have a very deep love for that city and still consider it home on many levels. But Nashville was a quality of life decision, and obviously it's music city, so this is a city that reveres music of all sorts. It's not just country music here. You know, there's lots of things going on, and there was it was really a decision that we thought we could take the leap, and if it worked, it worked, and if it didn't, we could always go back to New York. And I think the freedom of having that choice there, you know, made it kind of exciting, and it stuck, and we've been here for 6 years now.
Wow. And I told you I had someone on my Armenian program on Andre Madatian. He's a guitarist, and he lives in Nashville. But he said a lot of the same things you're saying about Nashville, is that some people think of Nashville as a country music place, but it's very diverse. From what I understand, I've never been there. It has all sorts of music, and from symphony to, you know, or chamber music, and to rock and pop and country, and it's just a very diverse place from what I understand. And I've never been there, and I've always associated that with country music, you know.
Well, I think a lot of people do, and certainly it you know, it is the mecca of country music. So there's no question that's a label that sticks for a reason. But I think in recent years it's exploded, you know, into a lot of different markets, and one of them particularly being the recording industry, and the fact that a lot of the session work from New York and LA has come here. So that's been a really cool and unexpected, delightful part of my career that I didn't anticipate when we came here, and it's one of the things I love the most. So.
Well, you've talked a little bit about your current project, but what's next? What's something that you always dreamed about doing? A collaboration with a specific artist, maybe a city that you want to go and perform and you've never been to that city or country, something, or composer, I don't know. I mean, something that you've always had in the back of your head and mind and you never had the opportunity to do it. You really want to do it.
We're doing it right now. And it's this project with my husband.
Wow.
And mostly because, we're able to explore a whole vocabulary of music that we've never been able to do before, and working together and having hopefully the opportunity to perform this music for other people. I've been very fortunate to travel all over the world, and there are plenty of places I haven't been. One city I've never been to that I really, really want to go to is Berlin. So that's high up on my list. But actually, one thing that I'll just mention is we were just in Tanzania in Africa right before the quarantine hit. Wow. And so we flew back from Tanzania the day before the travel ban went into effect.
Wow.
So we flew home and went straight into quarantine,
wow.
which was a very surreal and unusual kind of situation.
Yeah.
But, travel is a passion for us, and for me particularly. We love to explore the world and learn about the music in the different places. And it was, specific to Tanzania, it was very interesting to hear the Maasai culture. They're singing and they're dancing, and and what they were, what they brought to us when we'd show up at the tent camp and there'd be a group singing, and it was really, really cool. And I just hope that we have the opportunity to continue doing that.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you. Anything else you want to add before we end today?
I just thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight to talk with you, and I'm looking forward to getting to know more about you in the future, and maybe we can collaborate sometime.
Definitely. And I was going to say, when you guys are done with the album and everything's out, maybe we could have both of you on and really see the dynamic in the podcast format.
We would love that. Absolutely. I look forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me. Take care. Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Off the Podium. If you enjoyed this episode, please comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next episode.